That moment when you realize the person laughing the loudest at your expense is someone you once rocked to sleep. I do. I lived it, and I'll be honest with you. It took me a long time before I could talk about it without my hands shaking. My name is Glenda. I'm 63 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and for most of my adult life, I was exactly what everyone expected me to be: dependable, quiet, and easy to overlook. I taught elementary school for 28 years, third grade mostly. I knew every child's reading level by October, kept a jar of butterscotch candies on my desk that I wasn't technically supposed to have, and I showed up every single day, rain, flu season, broken heart, whatever, because that's what I did. That's who I was. When my husband left, I was 58, non-dramatically. No affair, no blowout fight. He just looked at me one Sunday morning over his coffee and said he hadn't been happy for years and didn't see the point in pretending anymore. He moved to Scottsdale 6 weeks later. Our daughter, Becca, was 31 at the time and already engaged to her boyfriend, a software project manager named Troy. No, wait, I need to not use that. A man named Cole. Cole Whitmore. Handsome in a catalog kind of way. Firm handshake. He called me ma'am until the day of the wedding, and I never quite trusted that. After the divorce, I took early retirement. The school offered a buyout package to teachers over 55, and I had enough years in the system that it made financial sense. My pension wasn't going to make me wealthy, but it covered my mortgage and my groceries and my one indulgence, which was a small pottery studio I converted from the detached garage behind my house. That's where the trouble started. Or rather, that's where Becca decided the trouble started. I'd always made things with my hands. Bowls, mostly. Mugs. The occasional vase that came out slightly lopsided, and that I loved more for it. After the divorce, I had time I'd never had before, and I started spending 4 or 5 hours a day in that studio. I wasn't trying to build anything. I was just trying to find something that felt like mine. But somewhere around month 3, I stumbled into something I hadn't expected. I'd been selling a few pieces at the Saturday farmers market downtown, mostly to be social, mostly to have somewhere to go on the weekends. One Saturday, a woman stopped at my table and picked up a mug I'd glazed in a deep teal, the color of the ocean right before a storm, and she held it for a long time. Then she asked me if I did custom orders. Her name was Adeline, and she ran a boutique home goods store on Lexington Avenue called The Still Room. She wanted to carry my work. I almost said no. I'm embarrassed to admit that, but I almost said no. Instead, I said yes. And then I went home and sat in my pottery studio for about an hour just staring at my kiln thinking, huh. Within 8 months, the still room was selling everything I could produce. Adeline kept asking for more. I started making larger batches, experimenting with different glazes, developing what I suppose you'd call a signature style, matte exteriors, slightly rough to the touch, with these unexpected bursts of color on the inside. People seemed to love the metaphor even if I hadn't consciously intended one. I took a small business course at the community college in the evenings. I filed as an LLC. I built a very simple website with photos my neighbor's teenage son took in exchange for a batch of chocolate chip cookies. I started an Instagram account that I managed with varying levels of competence. By the end of my first full year, I had made more money from pottery than I'd ever made in a single year of teaching. I told Becca all of this. Not in a braggy way, the way you tell your daughter things. Over the phone on a Tuesday, while you're both doing other things, the conversation wandering the way conversations do. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mom, that's sweet. Just don't overextend yourself, okay? It's a lot of risk at your age." I let it go. She was in the thick of wedding planning, and I knew her attention was stretched thin. I chalked it up to that. What I didn't know was what she was saying to other people. I found out later, much later, from my cousin Marla, who'd heard it from Becca's college roommate, who had apparently been at a brunch, where Becca described my pottery business as Mom's little therapy project, and said she was going along with it because what else are you going to do? Crush her dream? Marla told me this with a look on her face like she was delivering a terminal diagnosis, and honestly, it felt about that way. But I still didn't understand how deep it went until the rehearsal dinner. Cole's mother, a sharp, well-dressed woman named Vivienne, made a toast. Standard stuff, welcomed me into the family, mentioned how excited she was for the wedding. Then she turned to me specifically and said she'd heard I was keeping busy with a little craft hobby, and that she thought it was just wonderful that Glenda has found something to fill her time. I smiled. I thanked her. I took a sip of my water. Under the table, my hand was gripping my napkin so hard, I think I left wrinkle marks in the linen. I looked at Becca. She was smiling at her future mother-in-law with this expression of warm agreement, nodding like a bobblehead, and something inside me went very, very still. The wedding was on a Saturday in September, at a restored farmhouse venue outside of Hendersonville. It was genuinely beautiful. Becca had spent 18 months planning every detail, and it showed: the flowers, the lighting, the hand-lettered seating cards. I had offered to make ceramic name card holders for each place setting as a wedding gift, and she had initially said yes, then changed her mind 3 months later and said it might look too homemade. I made them anyway and kept them at my house. I still have them. I sat at the head family table next to my ex-husband's sister, a perfectly nice woman who didn't know what to say to me and compensated by asking about my flight, despite the fact that I'd driven 40 minutes from Asheville and had not been on a plane. I answered cheerfully. I was getting good at cheerful. The ceremony was lovely. I cried when Becca came down the aisle. Because that's what you do, and because despite everything, she was my daughter. And she was beautiful, and I wanted her to be happy. I meant that sincerely. The reception was where things went sideways. After dinner, Becca's best friend since college, a woman named Tiffany who had always made me feel like I was slightly in the way, stood up to give the maid of honor speech. I settled back in my chair with my glass of champagne and prepared to hear the usual: how they met, the funny stories, the tearful tribute to the bride. Tiffany had other plans. She started warmly enough. A story about their freshman dorm, something about a broken microwave, and a bag of popcorn that set off a fire alarm at 2 in the morning. People laughed. I laughed. So far, so normal. Then she said, and of course this wedding wouldn't be complete without acknowledging all the family who came to celebrate, including Becca's mom, Glenda, who has been very busy lately with her little pottery project. Polite laughter. I kept smiling. I have to say, Tiffany continued, tilting her head like she was being generous, I really admire the entrepreneurial spirit. It's so cute when people find a hobby that makes them feel productive. My grandmother makes jewelry. She sells about 3 pieces a year and she just loves it. More laughter. Bigger this time. My face was still arranged into something that I hoped looked like amusement. I had decades of practice of this, 28 years in a classroom teaching you to keep a neutral expression while someone is doing something completely unacceptable. Becca was telling me her mom has been really throwing herself into it since the divorce, Tiffany continued. And I heard the room shift slightly, the way it does when something crosses a line, but nobody wants to be the first to acknowledge it. Said she's convinced herself she's going to turn it into some big business. Which is just, it's adorable. It really is. Starting over at 60, selling bowls at the farmer's market? She paused, smiled. We love the ambition. I put my champagne glass down, slowly, carefully, because if I didn't do it slowly and carefully, something else was going to happen with my hands. I looked at Becca. She was laughing. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh. A real one. Her head was tilted back and she had her hand on Cole's arm and she was laughing at the farmer's market comment like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. I don't have words for what that felt like, even now. I've tried to find them and I can't. I picked my champagne glass back up. I took a sip. I looked at the centerpiece. White dahlias and eucalyptus. Very elegant. And I thought about how I had paid for half of this wedding. $34,000. I had pulled it from my retirement savings because Becca had asked me to, because Cole's family was covering the other half, and she didn't want to start her marriage with a financial imbalance, and I had said yes without hesitating, because she was my daughter. I was good at saying yes. Tiffany wrapped up her speech. People applauded. Someone clinked a fork against a glass for the obligatory kiss. The moment passed the way those moments do, swallowed by music and movement and people reaching for more wine. A man I didn't recognize leaned over to his companion at the next table and whispered something that made her cover her mouth to hide a smile, and they both glanced at me, and I understood that I was the entertainment. The evening continued. I danced when asked. I made conversation. I hugged Becca and told her she looked beautiful, and I meant every word. Then I went to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the closed lid of the toilet, and breathed very slowly for about 4 minutes. Then I fixed my lipstick and went back out, Cole's company was called Meridian Systems. They did something with cloud infrastructure that I had never fully understood despite multiple explanations. He'd been there 5 years and was apparently being considered for a director-level position, which was a big deal, and Becca was proud and I was happy for them. Genuinely. The company's CEO had been invited to the wedding. His name was Franklin Oakes. I knew this because it was on the seating chart that Becca had emailed me 6 weeks before the event, and I had looked at it the way I looked at all wedding logistics, carefully, trying to be helpful, trying to understand where I was supposed to stand and sit and be in order to cause the least amount of friction. I'd never met Franklin Oakes in my life. About an hour after the speeches, I was standing near the edge of the dance floor with a glass of sparkling water, watching a group of 20-somethings attempt a line dance with varying degrees of success, when a man in his mid-50s approached me. Silver at his temples. Dark suit, a quality about him that I can only describe as someone who had learned to be comfortable taking up space. "You're Glenda," he said. Not a question. "I am," I said. He tilted his head slightly. "Glenda Marsh?" I blinked. "Hartwell, actually. I kept my maiden name after the divorce." He went very still. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice had changed. "Did you say Hartwell? As in Hartwell Ceramics?" Now it was my turn to be still. "Yes," I said. "That's my company." He stared at me for a moment like he was recalibrating something. Then he laughed, a real laugh, surprised and a little helpless. "You're Cole's mother-in-law. As of about 3 hours ago, yes. I've been trying to get a meeting with you for 4 months," he said. "Your assistant keeps telling me your calendar is full." Here's what Franklin Oakes did not know, and what approximately no one at that wedding knew. Hartwell Ceramics was no longer a woman selling bowls at a farmer's market. It had started that way, but Adeline at the storeroom had introduced me to a buyer from a regional home goods chain who had introduced me to a rep from a national lifestyle brand who had asked whether I consider licensing my glazing techniques and aesthetic for a broader product line. I'd brought in the business partner, a woman I'd met at that community college class, a former corporate attorney named Suzanne, who'd wanted to do something different with the second half of her life and had exactly the kind of organizational mind that I completely lacked. Together we had built something I still sometimes couldn't quite believe was real. By the time of Becca's wedding, Hartwell Ceramics had a production facility just outside of Asheville, 14 full-time employees, distribution relationships with 3 regional home goods chains and 1 national retailer, and a licensing deal in final negotiation with a brand whose name you would recognize immediately. We were projecting $8 million in revenue for the current fiscal year. Franklin Oakes ran a venture capital firm that specialized in artisan and lifestyle brands. He had been trying to reach me because he wanted to discuss a Series A investment. I had been too busy to return his calls. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he excused himself, politely, a little urgently, and I watched him cross the reception hall to where a small cluster of Cole's work colleagues were standing. He said something. I saw the group shift. Several heads turned in my direction. Cole separated from the group and walked over to me with the expression of a man who has just been told something that rearranges his understanding of reality. "Glenda," he said carefully, I knew you had a pottery thing, but I didn't realize." "It's fine, Cole," I said, "because I am a woman who has spent 63 years being gracious in moments when I would rather be something else." "Franklin says Hartwell Ceramics has been on Meridian's radar as a potential client," Cole said. "For our enterprise logistics platform. He says your operation is exactly the size that—" "Cole." I put my hand on his arm. "It's your wedding day. We can talk business later." He nodded. He looked like he needed to sit down. Franklin Oakes, it turned out, did not wait for later. About 20 minutes after our conversation, he approached the DJ, said something brief, and then before I had any idea what was happening, he was holding a microphone in the middle of the reception hall. "I'm going to steal just 2 minutes," he said, and the room quieted with the attentiveness people give to someone who projects authority. "I promise I'll keep it short. I've been to a lot of weddings, and I've heard a lot of toasts, and I want to add one that I don't think has been made tonight." He looked across the room until he found me. "I had the very great pleasure of meeting Glenda Hartwell tonight for the first time. You may know her as Cole's new mother-in-law. What I suspect most of you don't know is that she is also the founder and co-owner of Hartwell Ceramics, which, and I say this as someone whose firm has been trying to get her attention for months, is one of the most remarkable small business success stories I've encountered in 20 years of doing what I do." The room had gone very quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a good toast. The other kind. The kind where people are suddenly aware of what they said an hour ago. She built this company from a garage studio in less than 3 years, Franklin continued. 8-figure revenue trajectory, 14 employees, national retail relationships, and she did it after retiring from a 28-year teaching career after a divorce in her 60s. He paused. I came to this wedding to celebrate Cole and Becca. I'm leaving it hoping I can finally get 30 minutes on Glenda's calendar. Laughter, warmer than any laughter that had happened earlier in the evening. I became aware of Tiffany's face across the room. She had gone the particular color of someone who is realizing, in slow motion, the precise dimensions of what they have done. I became aware of Becca. She was not laughing. She was looking at me with an expression I had never quite seen on her face before, something complicated and young, almost childlike, the way she used to look when she was small and had done something she couldn't undo and knew it. Her eyes were bright. Her chin was doing the thing it does when she's trying not to cry. I looked at her steadily. I didn't look away. I didn't soften my expression or give her a reassuring smile. I just let her look. It was the first time in years that I had let her sit in something without helping her out of it. Franklin finished his toast. People applauded. He made his way back over to me and handed me his card, and I slipped it into my evening bag, and we talked briefly about scheduling something for the following month, and that was that. The reception wound down the way receptions do. The cake was cut. The bouquet was thrown. The older guests started slipping away. I said my goodbyes, hugged Becca. She held on a little longer than usual, and drove the 40 minutes home to Asheville with the windows down and the radio on low and my thoughts keeping me company. She called me the following Wednesday. She was back from her honeymoon in Portugal. 10 days, which I had helped pay for, though I had not mentioned this, and would not, and she wanted to have lunch. She said she needed to talk to me. We met at a cafe downtown that she suggested, a place with good soup and small marble tables. She was already there when I arrived. She looked tired. She said, I didn't know, Mom. About the company, about any of it. I ordered coffee. I waited. I thought you were... She stopped. Started again. I thought it was just something to keep you occupied. After everything. I thought it was like a phase. I thought I was protecting you from getting your hopes up. Were you protecting me, I said, or were you embarrassed by me? She was quiet for a long time. Both, she finally said. I think both, and I'm ashamed of that. Here is what I have learned about forgiveness in 63 years. It is not the same as pretending something didn't happen. It is not a reset button. It does not come with immediate trust restored, or hurt feelings dissolved, or the images in your mind erased. Tiffany's voice at the microphone, Becca's head thrown back, the man at the next table whispering to his companion. But it can be a door you choose to leave open. I told Becca that I loved her. I told her that what happened at the wedding had hurt me in a way I was still processing. I told her I wasn't interested in pretending otherwise, and I wasn't interested in rushing past it for anyone's comfort, including hers. And I told her that if she wanted a relationship with me, a real one, not the managed, at arm's length version we'd settled into, then she was going to have to be willing to do some work she'd never done before. She nodded. She was crying by then, quietly, into a paper napkin. She said she understood. I suggested counseling. She agreed without hesitating, which surprised me. We found a therapist in Asheville who specialized in mother-daughter relationships, and we went twice a month for the better part of a year. It was hard. Most useful things are. Franklin Oakes and I met the following month at my production facility. He walked through the space, asked good questions, and made an offer that Suzanne and I spent 3 weeks analyzing before we accepted the terms with modifications. The investment closed in January. We added 7 employees in the spring. I kept my pottery studio in the garage. I still go out there on Sunday mornings, before the day gets going, and I make things that don't have to be perfect or profitable or impressive to anyone. Slightly lopsided mugs. Bowls that are just for me. Becca and I are better now. Not the same as we were. I don't think we'll ever be exactly the same, but maybe better than we were. More honest. Less performed. She came to the facility last spring with Cole, and I gave them a tour. Cole shook Suzanne's hand and asked intelligent questions about our supply chain. Becca walked slowly through the glazing area, picking up pieces, turning them over, reading the bottoms the way I'd seen customers do at the still room. At the end, she picked up a mug, deep teal, matte exterior. that surprise of warm amber on the inside, and she held it the way Adeline had held that very first one, almost 3 years before. "Mom," she said, "this is beautiful." I knew she meant the mug. I also think she meant something more than the mug. "Thank you," I said, and I let that be enough. I spent 28 years teaching other people's children to see the world as a place full of possibility. I suppose I'd just forgotten, for a while, to apply the same lesson to myself. 63 is not too old. It's not even close. I keep thinking about that mug Becca picked up in the glazing room, the teal one with the amber inside, and the way she turned it over in her hands like she was reading it. Like she was finally paying attention. There's something I've come to understand about the way life tends to settle accounts, and it has nothing to do with luck or timing, or who happens to walk into a wedding reception. What happened that September evening was the result of years of choices. Hers, mine, and everyone else's in that room. Tiffany didn't grab that microphone out of cruelty that arrived from nowhere. She grabbed it because she'd been allowed to, because I had spent decades making myself small enough to fit into spaces where people felt comfortable ignoring me. That pattern had a cost. And eventually the bill came due. Not for me, but for the people who had built their assumptions on top of it. I don't think Becca is a bad person. I want to be clear about that. But I do think she had grown accustomed to a version of me that was convenient. A mother who was grateful, undemanding, easy to manage. When I retired and started spending long hours in a garage studio, she didn't see someone building something, she saw someone coping. And because she never asked, and I never pushed the conversation, that story calcified into something neither of us questioned. That's where the real failure lived. Not in the speech, not in the laughter, in the years of quiet distance we both agreed to without ever saying so out loud. What I know now is that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when someone's watching. It's about not abandoning yourself when nobody is. All those Sunday mornings in the studio, all those evenings at the community college, all those calls with Suzanne about contracts and distributors and production timelines, nobody was applauding. Nobody even knew. I wasn't building toward a moment of vindication. I was building because it turned out I had something left to build, and walking away from that would have been a kind of dishonesty I couldn't live with, and the willingness to keep going. That's something I had to find on my own floor. In the silence after my husband left, in the particular loneliness of being a woman in her late 50s, who suddenly has to figure out what she actually wants. Nobody hands that to you. You either find it or you don't. I found it covered in clay dust in a converted garage, and I held on to it. What I hope Becca is learning, and I think she is, slowly, honestly, is that the people you underestimate are often the ones who simply stopped performing for your approval. That's not defeat. That's something much closer to freedom. 63 years is long enough to know that the only things that hold up over time are the ones built on something true. A business, a relationship, a life. If the foundation is real, it will eventually speak for itself. Franklin didn't need to grab that microphone, but I'm glad he did. Not because it humbled anyone, though it did, but because it gave Becca a chance to see me clearly, maybe for the first time, and that was the beginning of something that actually mattered. The mug she was holding, she asked if she could have it. I said yes.